Justin Trudeau announcing his cabinet picks, and I'm wondering if there was an adequate mix of like seasoned pros versus new faces. What struck you there?
I mean, one of the things that struck me was that it would sure be more impressive if Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott were still around in terms of pros, because he had some very big portfolios to sort of rejigger, especially, you know, he needed someone with gravitas at intergovernmental affairs given the state of interprovincial relationships right now, and I think Chrystia Freeland was the obvious choice, but, you know, then that leaves a hole at foreign affairs that François-Philippe Champagne that doesn't really fill in terms of any kind of gravitas or experience. So, I don't think there was anything surprising about it in terms of that mixture of vets and rookies, but after 4 years, I did kind of think, well, maybe there should be a little more, maybe a few more impressive veterans that you could think, oh yeah, like that's in good hands.
2015, we saw a huge push on gender. Did we see the same this time around? What struck you here?
I think roughly we saw the same thing. So the first time around, there was a huge push not only on gender, but on racial diversity as well. And it almost felt like Trudeau was building a cabinet sheerly based on that and less so on who exactly was suited for what role. And I think this time around in 2019, you're seeing him reassess that. So right now, if I'm not mistaken, we have 18 female cabinet ministers, 17 male cabinet ministers, so a little bit more skewed, but, you know, roughly equal, you know, nothing to shout about. I think one of the interesting moves, besides Freeland obviously, was moving Ahmed Hussein out of immigration to children and
Minister of Family,
Minister of Family and Children's Affairs, and moving Marco Mendocino from into the immigration portfolio. And I'm not sure what exactly was behind that move, but I think it was kind of a signal that Ahmed Hussein was not doing enough to really kind of figure out relationships with the U.S. on immigration issues, given that it's quite a bit of a hot topic right now.
Did they address adequately enough this issue of representation in the West? We see now that Jim Carr has been given this, I guess, special assignment as a representative to the prairies. Seamus O'Regan moves into energy. Did the government do good by that?
I mean, I think appointing Freeland was the right choice. I think she must be the most widely respected minister that they have, and there's only so much that diplomacy can do. If you can't build the stupid pipelines, there's nothing that she can do in the room to make Jason Kenney happy, right? But I think that's a logical move. Putting Seamus O'Regan at Natural Resources would seem to counteract that. I mean, he has not been a particularly effective minister anywhere that he's been. He was legendarily bad at veterans, insulting veterans. When your number one job is not to insult veterans, and to put him in, he's basically seen in the West as sort of a Trudeau surrogate. So I thought that was kind of an odd move. But beyond that, I mean, short of appointing someone to the Senate from Alberta and naming that person to cabinet, I don't see what else he really could have done. I mean, he doesn't have any MPs, between BC and Winnipeg. So I just don't. I think it was one very curious move and one excellent move. But as I say, he has to actually deliver the goods to Western Canada. There's nothing he can do symbolically to get rid of that, all that frustration.
I'm curious to see what Jason Kenney and Scott Moe are going to say about Chrystia Freeland kind of being Trudeau's knight to now deal with intergovernmental affairs, because on the one hand, she's born in Peace River. Both her parents were active in politics in Alberta. I didn't know these facts. She kind of hasn't really played them up, so to speak, but she is also very much a globalist. She can strike you as someone who's a bit of a downtown Toronto elitist. She has notoriously spent much of her time in Toronto as opposed to Ottawa when, in the 4 years of her being in government. So I think her choice is, an obvious one, but I also am curious to see how the West is going to react to her being kind of the point person on these affairs.
Picking up on that, so Melanie Joly has been named the Minister of Economic Development. Your thoughts?
Well, it's quite a rebound. She was one of the more notable demotions when she went from heritage down to tourism. Not much more than that struck me. She was a valuable member of the campaign team, and that'll get you a long way when it comes time for cabinet.
Some of the ministers that have stayed in their position, Navdeep Bains, Harjit Sajjan, and also the finance minister, Bill Morneau. Is that interesting that the Prime Minister would keep him on yet again?
I don't think so. I think Morneau has, he has been doing a good job in his portfolio if you just look at Canada's overarching economic performance, not regionally speaking, but the country on average. So I think that's good. I think what's interesting though is for a long time, if you look at the PMO's office, Jerry Butts was there, and a lot of the things I suspect that needed to be kind of either vetoed or not when it comes to the budget, Morneau's budget was kind of done by Jerry Butts. So what I'm curious about is what will the finance relationship now be with the new person in the PMO's office to replace Jerry Butts? So that's something that I think would be interesting to see.
I think, I don't think there was any real conspicuous reason at this point to change finance ministers, but he did have a pretty eventful 4 years. It's kind of remarkable that he did survive when you consider that he basically incited the entire small business community to revolution at one point with his tax changes and forgot, he forgot to disclose two things to the ethics commissioner, including that he owned a French chateau, which is, it's fun. That was my thought was, oh wow, he did survive all that when a lot of people said that he wouldn't.
But Trudeau survived more.
He sure did, yeah.
So very, very interesting, I guess, that you bring up what's going on in the PMOs in the Prime Minister's office. With respect to David Lametti, who stays on in that role that he took over in January as the Attorney General, Chris, you and I had talked about this a little bit earlier with respect to that oath.
Yeah, so there's, without getting too technical about it, he took a two-part oath. He stayed on as Minister of Justice and Attorney General, but as part of Anne McClellan's recommendations that came out of the SNC-Lavalin disaster, she recommended that the Attorney General portion of the portfolio be sort of conceptually separated from the Justice Minister portion of the portfolio, and that was one of the big confusions during the SNC-Lavalin situation, is that the PMO clearly could not understand why Jody Wilson-Raybould was insisting on acting as the Attorney General when they wanted her to act as the minister, in their government. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see where that goes. The SNC-Lavalin situation hasn't yet been resolved necessarily. Part of me wonders if that gets back onto the table. But hopefully it makes a change. But I kind of doubt that an oath. Unless he really believes in that separation, the oath isn't going to fix anything like the SNC-Lavalin situation down the line.
Final thoughts, anything else that struck you, someone that didn't get into this cabinet that perhaps should have been there, other curious appointments?
I think for me, two interesting changes was Katherine McKenna's move from the environment portfolio to infrastructure. I think she became quite a divisive figure on the campaign, especially when it came to matters of pipeline versus climate change. And I think, to calm things, they wanted to choose a less divisive, more neutral figure. The other point is Francois-Philippe Champagne's appointment to Foreign Affairs. I think it could be a calculation that, he just seems to be a, personable person to deal with. So that could have been a calculation. I'm just speculating.
Yeah, I think it's an issue of tone with both. It's certainly an issue of tone with McKenna. You look at her Twitter account and it's all sort of good vibes and everyone throw out your plastic straws and we'll save the world. Meanwhile, the government is not meeting its emissions targets. No disrespect to McKenna for the work she did, but the fact is that she was sort of trying to put this world-saving image on an incrementalist approach, and I think it annoyed a lot of people on both sides of the issue.
2015 was such a gender cabinet. We had talked about this. What's this cabinet?
On the one hand, they are saying the focus is climate change. To me, the focus seems to be repairing relations, attempting to repair relations with the West and, kind of mitigate these provincial divides.
I mean, there is no bigger issue in Canada right now than interprovincial relations, and so they put their best person there, and they're going to hope for the best. And to me, that really is the headline. But then the headlines become, I mean, as you say, she didn't do. I mean, you look at the China situation. I mean, that's no less intractable or more intractable than building pipelines out of Alberta. We'll have to see what she can actually do about it.